Here's a quick update on where we all are in terms of the class and the skill level. So just a quick update as I've been reviewing your videos. I really wanted to tell you that I really like what I've seen. I think that you guys are all in the right place. You are definitely at a different level than I expected, a higher level than I expected, which is good. I'm seeing great videos and really your receptive skills are really great because I'm seeing that you're understanding and that you're responding, and I'm getting more than I had expected, which is really great. So I just wanted to assure everyone that you're definitely in the right place. But of course, we are students of interpreting, and so I'm seeing similar errors happening and similar kind of, I call them giveaways, which what I mean by giveaway is something that indicates to me that you're a novice or a student of interpreting versus a longtime signer or a experienced signer, experienced interpreter, etc. Even though that's a long ways away, if you start to recognize these things now, I think that it'll help you to kind of spot it now, correct it now, and you'll even start to see it, I believe, in other people as you move along. So I'll talk about those errors that I've been seeing. So things that I'm seeing that I don't want to see and that you shouldn't want to see either is signs that should touch your body or touch your face aren't touching. Now, in the age of COVID and social distancing, when you're out in the community and wearing your face mask or face shield, that may be difficult. And so we are making adjustments. I'm making adjustments. But you are all home. I expect that you're all home when you're doing your recordings and socially distant from other people. And so you should be able to wash your hands before, after, and so touching shouldn't be a concern when you're recording your own video. But I'm seeing things like, but don't be afraid to touch your body. Enjoy um, things that should be on your face. Always, I got it on the wrong side. Um, anything from anything that requires touch, I'm noticing, and I actually notice it often. I can always spot a newer signer because they're afraid to touch. They might even do like help, and they're like missing that little touch there, or oppression. It's like missing. So please start to do some self-analysis and be self-aware and notice when your signs aren't touching because it's distracting, and it doesn't just appear as a newer signer or an experienced signer, but it doesn't come across as smoothly and as clearly in your message. So whereas your whole message might have been so beautifully crafted and created and expressed, but just because you did this instead of this, it kind of makes someone's eye jolt. So look out for signs that should be touching that aren't. And that includes hand shapes that should be closed that aren't. If the hand shape should be this, close it. Don't do that. Example, fish, leaf, cook, not cook. Um, things like that. It's mostly when your hand shape, when the four fingers should be like this, that I'm seeing them not like that. So keep an eye out for that. Also, I'm seeing your dominant hand should be most of your movement and also most of your finger spelling, which means you should switch finger spelling really just for placement. In the example of the video with the cats, Salem could be here, Tigger could be there, but I don't really have to do that. I can actually fingerspell with my dominant hand, and I can place them. It comes out smoother if you use your dominant hand. There should be a reason why you flip over, but what I'm seeing is hopping around, fingerspelling from both hands for no real reason in terms of your message or your placement, your sign space. So keep that in mind. Again, if you notice that you start using your dominant hand and all of a sudden flipped, why'd you do that? If it's a placement reason or a reason that has to do with your syntax and grammar, fine. But if there was no reason, then you've just kind of let us all know that you're a student of interpreting or a student of signing. The last thing that I wanted to point out to you is that I'm also seeing processing and thinking while you're signing, which is very different. Not like I do, and I'm like, oh, as I'm thinking about what message to give you. But I can see in your faces when you're trying to put the message out and you stop, and it looks like you're thinking about how to keep going. It's okay to practice your video before you record it. You shouldn't be processing on camera, and by processing on camera is it looks like you're processing your next thought, and you're processing how to word things, and that's not necessarily a problem, but sometimes you're processing with your hands. That's really what's calling attention, is that stopping to think and then expressing is absolutely fine, but stopping to think and then kind of half signing, thinking on your hands, that's distracting. So don't think on your hands. It's okay to stop and think. It's okay to pause. It's okay to practice and then record, but it's also okay to pause, think it out clearly, and then give it to us. You don't have to half think it, half put it on your hands. It's okay to take your time in recording your videos. Those are the three most common things. The main one is the two main ones I would say is closing your hand shape when it should be closed and touching your body or your face when the signs require that you touch. So those are the types of errors that I'm seeing on the videos, which is not a huge deal, but you really should be keeping an eye on that and being self-aware of that, because right now is when you can shape those bad habits and shape um, your fluency and just your overall style of signing. So now I want to touch on, we've been talking about two things, which is identifying the main idea and then summarizing a passage or something, that a narration that was said. So what is the main idea? The main idea is not, as I have been seeing some responses, a repetition of everything that happened. The main idea is, it's really simply what is the point? And it could be just one or two even statements. So what is it that they're saying? And if you know, what's the intention behind the story? If we're talking about the homework exercises, their intention is, we can kind of imagine that they've been invited to tell the story, to be a speaker somewhere, because they know that they're going to be recorded. So their intention is to share a story, a part of their experience, a part of their life story. And so what's the goal? We know that the goal is very educational. And it's something to consider, because if you know the goal of someone's story, then you can probably identify if there's an overall theme as they keep telling their story. But then it also helps you capture the main idea and know, if someone were to ask you, What was the point of this? How to identify what it is you're going to share. And so if that's the main idea, if one or two statements might be the main idea, then what's a summary? Because that's what we've been practicing. And the summary is a brief retelling of the main idea and some points. If we think back to the example of Steve Sandy, was the main idea of his story? The main idea was to share an experience that he had on a flight that was late. It was an embarrassing moment, and it was also sharing his life experience of travel. The important points were what? He ended up on this flight that he wasn't supposed to be on because he was late, because another flight was late. He was really preoccupied because he was worried about who was waiting for him. And so we know it was a girlfriend, but that's not important. That's just a detail. The important part is because he was preoccupied, he started basically pacing around in the cabin, which led to his embarrassing moment. So if you kind of think about that, we just kind of took out all those very specific details to get to the point of his story, which is to share this kind of wacky, from his perspective, experience, to share that something embarrassing happened to him. So again, to go back, the summary, it doesn't have to be the entire retelling of what just happened, because we're not there yet. We're looking at, can you identify the main point of this passage, and can you repeat it? So we're not just looking, can you understand? Do you have the receptive skills to understand? We're also looking for, do you have the critical thinking skills to say, that's important? Where else do you use these critical thinking skills? Maybe in class, when you're watching even these videos, are you taking notes? Are you able to grasp, oh, that seems like something important? It's the same concept of reasoning through what might be an important detail to pass on. And I wanted to share it with you. This is from a study in 2017. I'm going to give you a second to look at the graph. In this study, I'm actually going to move over. Let me add the link for you guys. So here's a link to the study, and this is really more for your information and for your future planning. I may ask you on a quiz the years of professional experience that might apply to novice and which would apply to an expert interpreter. And I've seen these numbers for these similar numbers for other professions. It takes that long to become an expert in your field, that much experience. And it may feel like a long time. And I can tell you that I felt like an expert from 5 years in. And now 20 plus years in, I'm like, oh my goodness, I was not an expert. You just feel like you've got a grasp on things and you feel like you understand things. I felt like an excellent interpreter, and I might have been a good interpreter, but I was not no expert level yet. And I can see things in such a different way now with the experience that I have, that I was completely missing. Not for lack of self-awareness or not for lack of trying, just my professional judgment hadn't developed fully yet, and my skill hadn't developed fully yet, and my eye for the language and for the work hadn't developed fully yet. And I know that I have ways to go. There's people that are so talented and so amazing that do such complicated work, and I know that's that's where I want to be, and hopefully I'm still around and I get there. So back to why I was showing you this study is I've just told you some errors that you're making, and some giveaways, I called them, that kind of indicate to another person with another eye your level. And it's not about hiding. It's a little bit about gaining confidence, but I'm trying to guide you along the way of spotting those errors where I was missing them completely. Now, for some time, it may take you for some time to kind of understand or even see them, but my goal is for you to kind of start thinking about it now, and hopefully it leaves you some kind of impression as your work continues. So if we look at this table here, a novice interpreter is someone with experience of 5 years or less as a full-time professional in interpreting work versus an expert with 10 years or more. A novice may or may not hold state certification. So actually there's something that, it's a catchy phrase that you may hear that I've said it, I say it often actually. A lot of people say it, is that out in the community is that certification doesn't really mean anything. On the one hand, it's gold. You need to become a nationally certified interpreter. On the other hand, from the perspective of a scheduler or coordinator, certification is a generalist exam and it doesn't really tell you someone's specialized skill set. So for me, certification is an entry to some opportunities, but it's really my skill set which differentiates me from somebody else. And those skill sets you don't really get to know from one person to the next without really having worked with them or getting to know them. Um, so that's why under the novice column, it says may hold state certification or none. Um, that's one reason for that, is that certification is kind of like uh, a rite of passage. You've gained entry, you've got the experience, you've got your pass, your passport to move on to other experiences, but it doesn't necessarily indicate your high level of skill. I'm going to skip the self-ranking part of this to jump into, because that's part of the study that I'm not going to go into, but to the last row that says experience in interpreting settings. And this is one of the reasons that I suggested to you that you don't limit yourself to one experience when you graduate. This is how you grow. So a novice interpreter will have a limited experience in a limited number of settings, whereas an expert interpreter will have interpreted across a variety of settings, situations, and it's not just about the skill required, but about the different things and complexities that come up that you have to deal with and offer a resolution to while you're interpreting. And those kinds of challenges and experiences really shape you and help you grow and help you to grow in your expertise. So I know that I shared these issues before. I'm now sharing with you the long path it takes to become an expert, which I hope that you all are on ready and on board for that journey. But it's just also to give you an idea that a lot of people are making those similar mistakes. And it's part of the growth process, and it's part of your experience and part of your career path. But it's also important to understand where you are in order to allow for mentorships and allow for suggestions and learning and feedback when you do get an opportunity to work with an experienced interpreter. What was really interesting in this study is that they talked about accuracy. The accuracy rate between a novice interpreter and an experienced expert interpreter. So I'll give you a second to look at that slide. So you can see here that the novice interpreter had a 74% accuracy, which is well below 80 compared to the expert interpreter. And they went into, depending on the language, the output that they're using, be it their L1 English or L2 ASL language. And here, to connect it back to the accuracy rate, that same study gave us some ideas or some examples of those skewed messages. For example, I cut and paste this from a number of them, so number 7. The English source, if your hand is burning, it's the nerves that are sensing that. So the novice interpreter, if you see what they sign, look at the expert one now. What is the difference between the novice and the expert? So the novice is saying, look, I just did the pointing that the expert did. The expert is saying, so they're adding visual information, they're adding facial grammar. If you look at number 8, the English source says, in our brains, we have about 10 billion neurons. I want you to look at this example because the novice says our brain has 10 million billion neurons. But the expert says total 10 million billion neurons, then shows the hand classifier to show them firing back and forth. And so now you realize the two sentences the experts have interpreted have added visual information. So the novice is just giving you the words. The expert is pointing you, giving you that visual information so that you see it's not just a billion of neurons, but what the neurons, they're doing this. They're acting. It's kind of adding visual information. So what I want to point out here is that there's types of changes in a message that an interpreter makes. One is a skewed message and one is dropping information. Now, when I've posted my voice interpretations of some of the videos, I've chosen to drop some information. And the question to you is, when the interpreter drops information, is it important information that's missing? And does it skew the message? The reason I dropped information in some of the interpretations was the signer was going too fast for me to fit it into my recording. And I dropped the most unnecessary detail. I tried to fit in as much as possible because I knew that you're using the recording to compare and to do your homework. But that's the key, is dropping information as a tool and as think about it as a resource for you to keep going and to be able to fit the important main points and main ideas in the message. So what you're dropping should be unimportant, an unimportant detail, versus the kind of error where you're skewing the message. Skewing the message means that's not what they're saying. You kind of took it in a different direction. That's an error versus an interpreting technique and approach. So how is that different from paraphrasing? Here's an example. The speaker says, I think you might be ready for the next challenge, but it will require some practice and studying on your part. The interpretation is, so this is paraphrasing. The message is still the same. As I embody the speaker when I'm interpreting to you, I'm letting you know that this challenge seems to be, you're fine for it. And the message is still there about practicing and studying. It's a bit of paraphrasing, but the meat of the message hasn't been lost. But here's an example of something that I've seen. A professor said, if you are struggling to upload your document, don't worry, everyone is struggling. Just let me know. The interpretation said, on the one hand, not completely wrong. Have they dropped information or have they skewed the message? That's the question for you. If you say they've dropped information, what have they dropped? They've dropped the part about if you're struggling, don't worry, everyone's struggling. But have they skewed the message if they don't include that? Here's the question for you. If you don't include that as part of your interpretation, are you rendering inaccurate information? What is the professor trying to say to the students when he says, if you're struggling, don't worry, other people are struggling? What he's trying to say is, we're all in the same situation. And as a student, when you're like, oh yeah, I thought I was the only one, but you too, and you too, and you too, don't you feel a little bit different? You feel a little bit like, I thought it was just me, and we are all struggling. And so it's a very different message if you just say, if it's hard to save a file, just let me know. There's still the part about you're fine, you're going to be fine, and let's talk about this. That part of the message is still there. But the part that's missing is the part that everybody got about you're not the only one struggling. And don't feel dumb or don't feel left out or like you don't fit in because you struggled. That's fine. Actually, he might be indicating that he's heard from a lot of people struggling because why would he say that? And so that's the question for you. If you're going to drop information, is it important? Why did you drop information? Is it because you're trying to keep up? Is it because it was difficult to sign? What's the reason that you dropped information? And how important was it? Versus, have you skewed the message? What have you done by dropping that information? Or have you said something a little bit different than what the professor was saying? That's the question that you have to weigh between dropping information and skewing it, which is something that I want you to consider as I have been receiving your videos on and your transcription of some of the assignments. Most of them are, you guys are doing great. This is not a critical moment. But I have noticed an occasional skew of a message that makes me think, that's not what they said. That's not exactly what they said. Or, oh, okay. And so I want you to start to think about, am I dropping information? That's fine as long as you have a reason for it. Or have you skewed the message? Has the message's meaning changed in any way? Something really important for you to start to consider as you move forward with other videos and other assignments. And that's it for my quick update on errors. I hope it made sense.